The story of the Northern Star is just one of many mysteries waiting beneath the ice. If you want to know what comes next, subscribe and stay with us for the next story. Don't miss the upcoming videos. There's always more hidden between the waves, and if this journey intrigued you, share the video with others who love a good mystery. Your support keeps the expedition alive. The first reports came not from sailors or satellites, but from the quiet data streams of NASA's Cryospheric Observation Network. Somewhere above the Greenland shelf, a metallic reflection appeared on several consecutive radar passes, lingering exactly where no vessel could possibly drift. It was motionless and solid, too symmetrical to be a fragment of glacier, too bright to be a shadow of rock. The analysts in Maryland labeled it a persistent anomaly, filed it under possible debris, and moved on. Only one of them, a young intern with a background in maritime archaeology, sent the coordinates to the Aurora Delta program, a joint Arctic research mission backed by NOAA, the Navy, and the University of Washington. Within a week, the coordinates reached Dr. Allison Gray. Allison stared at the monitor in her Seattle office long after sunset. The object sat high on an ice ridge, its radar silhouette unmistakably artificial. She overlaid historical maps, cross-checked old shipping routes, and felt a chill crawl down her spine when she saw the same coordinates listed in a declassified Navy report from 1964. The Northern Star, a naval research vessel, had vanished during a magnetic survey in the Greenland Sea that year. No wreckage, no distress signal, nothing but a cryptic last transmission, light below the ice. 60 years later, something metallic was gleaming in that same frozen corridor. By morning, the Aurora Delta mission had been reactivated. A compact 4-person team was assigned. Dr. Gray, mission leader and geophysicist; Trevor Conway, systems engineer and energy specialist; Michael Lee, communications officer and radio historian; and Lieutenant Dana Brooks, the Coast Guard pilot tasked with keeping them alive. Their objective was officially described as anomalous material investigation and magnetometric sampling. Unofficially, everyone on the manifest sensed that curiosity, not safety, was driving this trip. The flight north from Thule Air Base was long and punishing. The helicopter fought headwinds that shook the fuselage like a tin can, and through the portholes the Arctic stretched endless and brutal, a white infinity interrupted only by broken shards of blue ice. Trevor sat beside a crate of instruments, checking the battery readouts every few minutes. He lived for this kind of work, the sound of wind, the rattle of machinery, the promise of fixing something ancient. Across from him, Michael adjusted his headphones, chasing ghost signals from the empty spectrum. Allison watched them both in silence. Her mind wasn't on the cold, but on the past, the thin paper file she'd found years ago, stamped Northern Star, missing at sea. She had read it dozens of times, always wondering what could make a ship vanish without a trace. Now she might finally find out. They reached the coordinates at 14:20 hours. What they saw made the cabin fall silent. Below them rose a jagged ice arch, glistening like a frozen wave caught mid-crash. And perched across its crest, impossibly balanced above a black chasm of water, was a ship. It leaned forward as if forever advancing, its bow raised against the wind, its hull sealed in ice. Even from above they could see the corrosion, the faded paint, the letters still faintly visible on the side. Northern Star. Jesus, Trevor whispered. That thing's flying. Dana circled once, careful to keep distance from the turbulent air rising from the crack beneath the arch. The ridge was stable enough for landing 200 meters away. She set the helicopter down with the precision of someone who had done this 100 times, but even she couldn't shake the unease in her voice when she said, "No tracks, no drift trail," like it grew out of the ice. The team stepped out into the wind. The temperature was -34, yet Allison felt sweat beneath her parka. The silence was uncanny, no cracking, no seabirds, no engine noise, just the faint whine of snow brushing metal. The ship loomed above them like a monument, a relic of another world, its frozen hull catching the sun in dull orange gleams. Trevor's breath fogged as he stared upward. She's almost intact. They climbed the ridge with harnesses and ice screws, their crampons biting into ancient frost. Up close, the Northern Star looked both familiar and alien. The steel plating was rusted but whole, the rivets unbroken. The bridge windows were glazed with frost, yet beneath the ice lay a faint inner glow, a soft warmth that made the frost melt and refreeze in delicate fractal webs. Allison touched the railing and jerked back. It was warm. Not just relative warmth, genuine, physical heat emanating from within the hull. Trevor pulled out a thermal reader. The screen flickered and displayed uneven orange patches across the ship's belly. 72 degrees Fahrenheit, he muttered. Inside. That's not possible, Michael said. There's no power source. Allison's eyes narrowed. Unless it never lost power. They found a side hatch unsealed. The rubber gasket around its edge was still pliable, as though manufactured yesterday. With a collective push, they forced it open. A whisper of warm air brushed their faces, faintly metallic and dry, carrying the smell of ozone and oil. Lights glimmered faintly inside, real lights, yellow and pulsing, as if the ship's heart had never stopped beating. The corridor beyond the hatch looked frozen in time. The walls were lined with gauges, pipes, and analog switches. Dust didn't exist here, only thin condensation and the sheen of old paint. Their boots clanged softly on the floor, echoing down a passageway that curved toward the bridge. Each door they passed was sealed, labeled in the style of the 1960s Navy fleet. Radio control, engine access, crew quarters. Michael paused at the radio room and peeked through a small window in the door. He could swear he saw the faint red glow of vacuum tubes still lit inside. Allison led them to the bridge. She half expected to find bones, frozen figures at the helm, but the chairs were empty, the charts untouched. The main console blinked weakly. A green indicator light flickered with irregular rhythm. Trevor opened a panel and whistled low. Old diesel generator, but the circuit's hell. These are military grade, shielded. Could have stayed charged if isolated. Charged for 60 years? Allison asked. He shrugged. If the environment froze it in perfect stasis, maybe. On the captain's desk lay an open logbook. The pages were brittle but perfectly preserved, ink still dark and legible. Allison leaned over and read aloud. November 12th, 1964. Visibility 0. Light under the ice magnetic interference increasing. Crew reports vibration in the hull. Ordered partial shutdown of engines. Testing communication. No response. Entering passive drift mode. The next page was nearly blank except for a single line written in a shaking hand. If anyone finds this vessel, do not start the generator. It remembers. The words hung in the air like frost. None of them spoke for several seconds. Then Michael broke the silence. We should probably leave that thing alone, Trevor frowned. Or maybe we find out what it remembers. They moved deeper into the ship. The deeper they went, the more the illusion of time collapse grew. In the mess hall, metal cups still sat in neat rows. The air was breathable, almost mild. Instruments responded to touch with faint clicks. And yet outside, the storm line was drawing closer, the sky darkening, snow whipping in slow spirals over the arch. Dana's voice crackled through the radio. Weather's turning faster than forecast. You've got maybe 2 hours tops. They made their way back toward the radio control room. Inside, the equipment was humming softly. Tubes glowed red like embers. Michael turned one of the dials, expecting static, but what came through the speaker froze him in place. A voice, faint but unmistakable, was repeating a call sign. This is Northern Star. Coordinates fixed. Sea calm. Holding position. Then a pause. Then the same words again. Identical inflection, identical spacing, like a recording trapped in a loop. Only one detail differed. The timestamp in the transmission header read November 12th, 1964. Allison exchanged a look with Trevor. That's not playback. It's transmitting now. From where? Michael whispered. Trevor pointed downward. From here. The voice continued, faint and patient, unchanging. Allison felt the hairs on her neck rise. The air inside the radio room vibrated subtly, as if the hull itself was resonating with the signal. She noticed the green indicator on the generator control slowly pulsing, like a heartbeat beneath the ship. The pattern matched the rhythm of the radio loop. Each pulse seemed to sync perfectly with the pauses between the words. Outside, the wind began to howl. Ice cracked somewhere underfoot, echoing up the hull. Dana's voice again. Team Aurora, confirm status. We're seeing structural shifts on the arch. Trevor adjusted his headset. We copy. Give us 20 minutes. He turned to Allison, his face pale but excited. If we can trace the power path, maybe we can... No, Allison cut him off. We record. We document. Then we leave. He didn't argue, but she saw the stubborn gleam in his eyes. They packed the logbook, took samples of air and metal, and moved back toward the hatch. The corridors now seemed darker, the faint lights flickering. Somewhere deep in the ship, something creaked, not mechanical, but almost organic, like a sigh escaping from steel lungs. The warmth had intensified. Drops of water began to fall from the ceiling, hissing as they hit the cold floor. When they emerged onto the deck, snow was falling in thick, silent flakes. The helicopter's rotors spun slowly in the distance, ready for liftoff. Yet no one spoke as they clipped onto the safety lines and descended. Allison looked back once at the ship's bridge. Through the fogged window, the faint glow still pulsed, steady and rhythmic. At the base of the arch, Michael's radio hissed again, unprompted. The same voice, calm and timeless. We are holding position. The sea is calm. The storm has passed. Only now it sounded closer, fuller, as though the words were coming from within the ice itself. Allison turned off the radio. By the time they reached the helicopter, the storm front was already sweeping in, a gray wall swallowing the horizon. Dana gunned the engines and shouted over the noise. Whatever that thing is, we're not the first to find it, and we might not be the last. The aircraft lifted off, snow swirling beneath it, the ship shrinking to a dark shape half buried in white. No one looked down again until they were miles away. When they did, they saw something none of them could explain. A faint glimmer under the ice far below the ship, spreading like a pulse of light through the water, steady and deliberate, as if answering an old signal that had finally been heard. The storm that chased them away from the ice ridge lasted 3 days. It spread across the Greenland Sea like a gray hand, shaking every buoy and research outpost within 100 miles. In Thule, the wind screamed through the hangars. Snow climbed the walls in brittle waves. Inside the base's small operations room, the members of Aurora Delta huddled around glowing screens, replaying the same drone footage over and over. The frozen arch, the ship poised above it, and that strange, faint glimmer under the ice before everything vanished in white. No one spoke much the first night. The helicopter sat grounded under tarpaulin, its rotors crusted with frost. Michael busied himself salvaging the radio logs, piecing together bursts of static that might conceal patterns. Trevor inspected the power units, muttering that he could have stabilized the signal if only he'd had a few more minutes. Allison filed the mandatory report to NOAA, but left out most of what had happened. She wrote about unexpected heat emissions and possible residual charge from thermoelectric corrosion. Nothing more. Her superior would never believe the truth that a 60-year-old ship had pulsed like a living heart beneath her hands. On the third morning, the storm broke. Outside, the horizon cleared to a blade of pale light. The sea beyond the fjord was a quilt of new ice. Allison stared at it from the runway, a steaming mug between her gloves. The others were already waiting near the hangar, their faces drawn from exhaustion. None of them wanted to say it, but they all knew they had to go back. The official reasoning came easily. Incomplete survey data, loss of environmental sensors, anomalous readings that needed confirmation. The unofficial reason was far simpler. Curiosity had not loosened its grip. The Northern Star was still out there. It had waited 60 years. Surely it had not vanished in a single storm. By noon, permission was granted. The sky, newly calm, promised a narrow window of safety. The helicopter lifted off again, slicing through columns of mist. The flight felt different this time, quieter, heavier. The coordinates in the GPS pointed to the same patch of sea ice, but the map now showed open water. Donna flew by instinct, tracing the ridge lines like memories. When the ice arch came into view, Allison felt her stomach twist. The formation was half collapsed, the curve broken into jagged spires. The ridge where the Northern Star had rested was gone, replaced by a long black fissure where seawater steamed in the cold. Yet as they circled, the radar pinged metal, large mass, still beneath the surface. The ship had not disappeared. It had sunk into the ice as though the glacier had swallowed it whole. They landed on the new sheet forming over the fissure. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees, but the air smelled faintly of ozone again. Trevor unpacked the magnetometer. Its needle spun like a compass in panic. "Field's distorted," he said. "It's twisting around something big down there." Michael knelt by the radio receiver, scanning frequencies. At first there was only static, then faint, patient. The same looped voice returned. "Northern Star, coordinates fixed, sea calm, holding position." The timestamp was still November 12th, 1964. Allison listened through the headphones. Each word sounded as if it were being spoken from behind glass. "It's not an echo," she murmured. "It's continuity. The transmission never stopped. It's still happening now, in its own frame." They set up a temporary shelter on the ice and began to analyze what data they could collect. Trevor ran spectral readings while Michael synchronized the radio feed with modern atomic time signals. The result chilled them all. The pulses were perfectly regular, but offset by exactly 60 years, as though the ship's internal clock had never advanced beyond that final day. As dusk fell, they debated what to do next. Returning to base with partial data would end the mission. They would never be allowed back. But if they stayed, the ice could break again. Allison weighed the options silently, then decided they would re-enter the ship if possible. At dawn, the fissure had frozen into a crust thick enough to bear their weight. A dull shadow glowed beneath the surface, its edges blurred by frost. Trevor drilled a narrow borehole, lowered a thermal probe, and nearly dropped it when the reading jumped to room temperature. The heat was rising from below. "She's alive again," he whispered. Using cutting torches, they widened the opening until the tip of a railing emerged, slick and steaming. A ladder followed, leading into darkness. Allison felt the air shift, a faint exhalation, warmer than it should have been. She descended first. The interior was exactly as they had left it, only more awake. The lights burned steady, not flickering. The corridors hummed with low energy. Somewhere deeper in the hull, something beat in rhythm with their footsteps. Allison's breath fogged and dissipated in seconds. Trevor trailed behind her, carrying diagnostic scanners, while Michael recorded every frequency the ship emitted. In the bridge, the logbook still lay open. The handwriting glistened slightly as if freshly inked. Beside it, the captain's chair had turned a few inches toward them. Trevor frowned and placed his hand on the generator control panel. It vibrated under his palm. "Still cycling," he said. "The core's running some kind of feedback loop. Maybe geothermal, maybe residual capacitors." Allison shook her head. "It's not residual anything. The system is stable. That means something's controlling it." They split up to examine different sectors. Michael took the radio room, Allison the upper deck, Trevor the engine hold. The air pressure changed as they moved, an almost imperceptible tightening, like the deep sea squeeze of a submarine dive. The clocks on the walls ticked at irregular tempos. One showed the correct date, another spun backward. In the radio room, Michael watched the dials spin by themselves. The voice came through again, but now it carried faint background noise. Overlapping whispers, fragments of sentences not in any language he knew. He recorded everything. When he later replayed it, he would realize the pattern mirrored Morse code coordinates matching their current position, repeating the same minute over and over. Down in the engine compartment, Trevor found the source of the pulse. The main generator loomed like a monument, its pistons sealed under layers of frost that refused to melt. A soft vibration passed through the floor. The rhythm matched the heartbeat of the transmission. He tried to shut the system down manually. The lever resisted, then shuddered back into place. Sparks arced across the panel and a low tone filled the room. It wasn't mechanical. It sounded almost like a sigh. Allison joined him, eyes wide at the readings. "It's pulling current from nowhere," she said. "No external feed, no decay curve. It's generating power without consumption." Trevor's response was half awe, half defiance. "Then it's a closed loop, a temporal one." The air thickened, trembling with unseen energy. The lights dimmed to a deep amber. Through the steel walls came the groaning of shifting ice. Overhead, Dana's voice crackled faintly on the radio. Magnetic interference is spiking. What are you doing down there? Something's happening, Allison answered, but the signal drowned in static. A sudden vibration threw them off balance. The floor plates rippled underfoot. Trevor grabbed the console, shouting that he needed to stabilize the frequency. Allison pulled at his arm, insisting they leave, but he refused. If we don't damp it, the feedback could tear the hull apart, he yelled. She hesitated for one fatal second, then helped him reroute the current through the auxiliary circuit. The lights steadied. For a moment it seemed to work. Then came a noise like a heartbeat amplified 1,000-fold, echoing through the decks. Every gauge needle snapped to zero, then spun full circle. The ship inhaled. Water rushed somewhere below, though no breach was visible. A wave of warm air swept through the corridors, carrying the smell of ozone and rusted salt. Trevor looked around in disbelief. It's sinking, he said. It's sinking with itself. They stumbled back toward the main passage, the glow behind them swelling brighter. In the radio room, Michael's recording equipment seized. The tape reels spun backward, then forward again, blurring the sound into a deep, continuous hum. He tore off his headphones and shouted their names, but his voice came back to him, delayed by several seconds, as if the walls themselves were echoing from another moment. Up on deck, the world had changed. The sky burned with green aurora spirals, far too low for the season. The ice around the ship was cracking open in precise concentric rings, each fracture glowing faintly before freezing again. The Northern Star was no longer a relic. It was a mechanism responding to commands no one could read. Allison reached the bridge and slammed the emergency log closed. Her instincts screamed that they had to leave. She called for Trevor and Michael, heard them through the corridors, their voices warped by distance. "We're shutting it down," she shouted, though she wasn't sure to whom. The hum intensified, a low harmonic that resonated in bone. She felt her heartbeat fall into rhythm with it. The ship's instruments now all pointed to one thing, the word time stamped across digital overlays. Though this ship had never possessed digital systems, the past and present were folding together. In that moment, the voice returned, clear and human, projected through every speaker. "Do not start the generator. It remembers." The same words from the captain's log, spoken by a voice that could have been his or Trevor's or her own. Then silence. The lights went out. When they returned, only she and Michael stood on the deck. The quarters behind them were empty. The hum had stopped. The warmth was gone. The air smelled of frozen iron again. "Trevor," she called, but the echo died instantly. They searched until the last of their flashlight batteries died. No sign of him. No footprints. No movement. Just the faint rhythmic click of the generator deep below, ticking like a clock winding down. By the time they surfaced through the hatch, the fissure was widening. The helicopter hovered nearby, rotors kicking up snow. Dana's voice came through loud now. "Get aboard now!" Allison shoved the logbook and data drives into her pack, took one last look at the ship, and climbed out. The moment her boots touched the ice, the Northern Star shuddered once and began to sink. Not a violent descent, but a graceful lowering, as if the sea were reclaiming what was never meant to rise. The glow beneath the ice brightened, then dimmed, leaving only black water. They lifted off seconds before the crack closed. From above, Allison saw the last ripple vanish into the waves. The radio on her lap still hissed. She turned the dial slowly. Amid the static, faint and steady, a single line repeated, "We are holding position. The sea is calm. The storm has passed." She realized it was no longer coming from below them, but from everywhere around, bouncing between satellites, carried by time itself. The flight back to Thule was silent. Michael sat staring at his hands, refusing to replay the recordings. Dana focused on the instruments, avoiding their eyes. Allison kept watching the horizon, where the aurora faded behind gray clouds. She didn't know what she would write in the next report, or how she would explain Trevor's absence. But she understood one thing. The Northern Star had not died. It had found equilibrium in another moment, another slice of reality, holding its position forever. When they landed, the base was nearly empty, the wind gentle now. Allison walked alone to the communications tower, plugged the recorder into the main console, and listened one last time. The same loop played, But between the phrases, she thought she heard something new. A faint rhythmic pattern, slower, softer, a heartbeat reduced to a whisper. She closed her eyes, unsure whether it came from the speaker or from within her chest. Outside, the polar night settled again, endless and indifferent. Beneath miles of ice, something mechanical and timeless breathed in silence, waiting for the next curious voice to call its name. The base at Thule never slept, but that night it might as well have. Silence reigned across the corridors, broken only by the steady hum of generators and the distant clang of ice shifting on the shore. Dr. Allison Gray sat alone in the debriefing room, the soft blue glow of the monitor painting her face in fatigue and disbelief. She had rewritten the report 3 times, deleting every attempt that strayed too close to the truth. Subject vessel submerged. Environmental instability. 1 team member unaccounted for. That was all she dared to write. No mention of the living heartbeat in the hull or of the voice that spoke from nowhere. No admission that Trevor Conway had simply ceased to exist the moment the ship went silent. Michael had retreated to the communications room hours ago, trying to isolate the faint echo still whispering on the radio. It wasn't constant anymore, but every so often the frequency came alive, always the same calm male voice, speaking the same words. Northern Star, en route, calm seas, 1964. Each time the timestamp embedded in the signal header aligned perfectly with a moment 60 years in the past. There was no degradation, no static decay. It was as if the message was being broadcast live, through some corridor of time that refused to close. When Allison finally left the report unfinished and stepped into the hallway, she found Michael asleep at his console, headphones still clamped over his ears. The radio hissed softly, the green signal light pulsing like a heartbeat. She didn't have the strength to wake him. Outside the window, the horizon was beginning to glow, a false dawn reflected from the snowfields. She told herself they would rest for 1 day, maybe 2, and then go home. The mission was over, but deep inside, she knew it wasn't. The next afternoon, a representative from the Navy arrived by transport plane, a quiet man in an unmarked parka, who introduced himself only as Commander Everett. He carried a small black case and a series of forms for Allison to sign. The department is assuming custody of all physical evidence and recordings related to Project Aurora Delta, he said, his voice steady but impersonal. Standard protocol. You'll receive copies of the sanitized data for publication. Allison felt her jaw tighten. What about the missing man? Everett's gaze didn't waver. Presumed lost in the field. Weather conditions made recovery impossible. That was all. The matter officially was closed, but the Northern Star refused to stay buried in paperwork. The same night the commander flew out, the base's early warning radar began picking up an irregular echo. It appeared on the screen every hour and 17 minutes, always from the same position on the ice shelf, about 50 nautical miles from the last recorded location of the ship. It wasn't strong enough to be a vessel, but too distinct to be natural interference. Michael was the first to notice. He rushed into Allison's quarters, hair uncombed, eyes wild. It's her, he said. The Star. She's moving. At first, Allison thought it was impossible. The ship had gone down in front of their eyes, consumed by the sea. Yet the radar pulse persisted, rhythmic and deliberate. Against all reason, something was still active out there. Within hours, the Navy locked down communications, citing solar interference. But that night, when the aurora flared over the base like a curtain of green fire, the voice returned on the emergency frequency. Only 2 words this time. Anchor engaged. By dawn, they were already preparing a return flight. Dana argued bitterly against it. We barely made it back alive last time, she said, slamming her glove against the instrument panel. If that thing's still active, it's not just physics we're dealing with anymore. But Allison's resolve had hardened into something close to obsession. If Trevor's alive, she said quietly, we can't leave him in there. Michael said nothing, only packed his recorder and the surviving logbook pages into his pack. The weather cleared in the afternoon, the sky a flat silver mirror. The helicopter lifted off once more, tracing the same deadly corridor over the ice. The coordinates pulsed on the screen like a beacon. When they arrived, the landscape was unrecognizable. The old fissure had sealed, replaced by a smooth plain of freshly frozen ice. At first it seemed empty. Then through the haze of snow, they saw the shadow beneath the surface. The Northern Star had risen again, partially embedded in the ice, its bow angled upward, as if it were trying to break free. They landed a safe distance away. The air was eerily still. Even the usual groaning of the glacier had ceased. Allison and Michael approached on foot, their boots crunching in rhythm with their hearts. The ship's hull was intact, gleaming under a thin skin of frost. Not a single crack marred its surface. The name on the side looked freshly painted, as though someone had restored it overnight. And from within, a faint hum emanated, familiar and dreadful. Allison placed her palm on the metal. It was warm again. The sound beneath it pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. Michael stood beside her, clutching the radio. "Same frequency," he whispered, "still transmitting." The voice came through, clear and steady. "Northern Star en route. Storm cleared, all systems operational." But the voice was wrong. It wasn't the captain's, nor any recording. It was Trevor's. They exchanged a glance of disbelief. "He's alive," Allison said. "He's trapped in there." She stepped toward the hatch. Michael grabbed her arm. "You can't," he said. "If it's a loop, if it's feeding on itself." "I have to," she interrupted. The decision was already made. She slung the pack over her shoulder and began climbing the ice-rime ladder. The hatch opened at her touch, easily. Too easily. The air that met her was temperate, almost pleasant, carrying that same electric tang. Lights glowed softly along the corridor. Inside, nothing had changed. The logbook was still on the desk, the instruments alive. Only one thing was different, a new entry in the log, written in Trevor's handwriting. "System stabilized, crew intact, preparing to resume voyage." Her breath caught. The pen lay beside the book, ink still wet. She turned, half expecting to see him there. Instead, she heard footsteps echoing down the hall, measured and heavy. She followed the sound to the engine room. The generator pulsed steadily, its rhythm slow and calm. And there, standing beside it, was Trevor Conway. His face was pale but peaceful, his uniform unmarked by time. When he looked at her, his eyes reflected the same faint golden light that shimmered from the machinery. "You shouldn't have come back," he said softly. His voice was layered 2 tones at once, one human, one metallic. "It's balanced now. The star found equilibrium." "What did you do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I didn't do anything," he replied. "It wasn't meant to die. It remembered how to stay alive. It just needed a circuit." He placed a hand on the generator, and the metal seemed to ripple beneath his touch. "It's not a machine anymore. It's continuity." Allison took a step forward, but the air thickened like syrup. The space around her shimmered, bending light. Through the distortion, she saw fleeting images, crewmen at their stations, laughing, talking, unaware of the years that had passed. The ship was alive in 1964 again, and she was intruding. "You can come back," she whispered. "We can shut it down." Trevor shook his head slowly. "There's no back. The moment I tried to stop it, it folded around me. I'm part of the loop now. You need to leave before it pulls you in too." The ship groaned, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the hull. Michael's voice crackled faintly over the radio. "Allison, the ice is breaking again. We need to go." She looked one last time at Trevor. His expression was calm, almost relieved. "Tell them it worked," he said. "Tell them the storm's over." Then the lights flared, blinding white. When she woke, she was lying on the ice, Michael kneeling beside her, shaking her shoulders. The ship was gone. Not sunken this time, not shattered gone, as though it had never been there. The surface beneath them was smooth, unbroken. The only trace was a faint ring of melted frost where the hull had once rested. They fled to the helicopter as cracks began racing across the plain. Dana lifted off with barely enough thrust, the ice collapsing into the sea below. As they rose, Allison looked down and saw a final glimmer deep beneath the water, a golden pulse fading into darkness. The return flight was wordless. The 3 of them were hollowed out, as if something inside had been erased. When they landed at Thule, there were no Navy officers waiting this time. No questions, no explanations. The radio in the control tower was dead silent, save for the faint hum of atmospheric static. Allison handed the remaining data drives to Michael, telling him to lock them away. Then she went to her quarters and sat by the window until the horizon swallowed the last light. Days passed. The storm fronts rolled over the Arctic again, burying the sea under new layers of ice. The world went on. Reports were filed, memorials written, and the Northern Star was officially declared lost once more. But Allison couldn't sleep. Every night she dreamed of the generator's rhythm, of Trevor's calm eyes. Sometimes she woke certain she could hear it, the low, steady pulse echoing through the pipes of the base, faint but real. One night, unable to bear it, she returned to the communications room. Michael was there, staring at the console as if afraid to touch it. "You hear it too?" she asked quietly. He nodded. The green signal light was pulsing again, faint but alive. Allison put on the headset. At first, only static. Then the voice clear and unwavering. "Northern Star en route. Calm seas. 1964. She listened, heart pounding, as the pattern repeated. Then in the smallest pause between loops, a second voice whispered, a woman's voice this time, distorted but unmistakable. It said her name. She tore off the headset. Michael caught it before it hit the floor. They looked at each other, neither daring to speak. Outside, the aurora shimmered across the sky, painting the snow in hues of green and blue. The sound faded again, leaving only the heartbeat of the generators. Weeks later, the Navy dismantled the Aurora Delta project entirely. The data was classified, the site marked as unstable. Allison and Michael were reassigned, their research silenced. But sometimes on quiet nights in the main coastal monitoring station, where she now worked, Allison would scan the emergency frequencies out of habit. And sometimes, just before dawn, she would catch it, a faint voice far out in the static, repeating the same message the same way it always had. Northern Star, en route. Calm seas. 1964. No one else ever heard it. Years would pass before another research vessel reported seeing something strange off the coast of Iceland. An old ship adrift between fog and aurora light, its hull gleaming faintly under the stars, no crew visible. The captain's log of that sighting would never reach publication. It would end with a single sentence, scrawled hurriedly before the signal cut out. Time is not a current, it's an anchor. And somewhere beneath the frozen sea, in a place where years fold like waves and silence breathes like wind, the Northern Star would keep its course, steady, eternal, holding its position against the pull of time, waiting for the next voice brave or foolish enough to call it back. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next video. Check out the other videos on our channel. And if you enjoyed this one, share it with your friends.